preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. My name is John Ruskay. As Director of Education at the 92nd Street Y, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Y and this concluding evening of Shattered Tablets, Jewish Spiritual Struggles with Modernity, our annual series co-presented by the Y and the Radius Institute. First, a preliminary announcement. This series is part of a rich array of Jewish content programs at the 92nd Street Y. During the past few years, we have expanded and enriched Jewish programming at the Y, developing new classes, workshops, special evenings such as this one, the annual State of World Jewry Address, community study evenings, major Jewish film series, and an outstanding program reaching out to unaffiliated Jews. These programs have attracted tens of thousands of Jews throughout the year, both from those most committed and those not yet deeply involved in Jewish life. In addition to the Jewish Omnibus program, the Y has launched the American Jewish Theater, Jewish Opera at the Y, and extraordinary programs of Jewish education for the adult mentally retarded and children with learning disabilities. To continue to expand the Y's Jewish programming and to make certain that these programs endure, we are building a $3 million Jewish Culture Endowment Fund. The National Endowment for the Humanities has awarded the Y a $500,000 challenge grant, both to endorse the work that has been done to date and to contribute to this endowment drive. To earn this grant, we need to match every government dollar with 3 private dollars. Need I say that your participation in this campaign is invited and will be deeply appreciated. And to make it easy, we have provided you with an envelope which, when filled, will enable you to join us in this unique partnership with the federal government to strengthen Jewish education at the 92nd Street Y. We hope you will become a partner with us in this effort. Second, as you walked in, you may have seen a number of 92nd Street Y publications. In response to growing demands, we've started a modest publications program, making it possible for those who attend our major evenings and those who cannot to read and study some of what takes place here. The 1981 and 1982 community study programs with Rabbis Miller, Riskin, and Zimmerman are now available, as are Stuart Eisenstadt and Gerson Cohen's State of World Jewry Addresses. These publications will also be available for purchase at the conclusion of the evening. Now to our program. Cynthia Ozick had to travel to Israel on short notice and therefore regretfully cannot be with us this evening. In addition to our collective loss in not having Cynthia with us tonight, it denies us this opportunity to publicly thank her for so richly contributing to the first 5 evenings of this series. From our perspective, she has been an ideal moderator, delightfully bringing together her prodigious charm, imagination, and intelligence to probe the ongoing process of confronting modernity. We thank her for honoring us with her presence. When thinking about how to substitute for Cynthia this evening, we came to the view that while there are many others more deeply trained in theology and the sources, the personal and intellectual issues which stimulated Steve Shaw and me to develop this series last spring might make it useful for us to serve as the respondents on this concluding evening. In many ways, the focus of this series is highly personal for us. These issues, confronting modernity and developing belief systems that work, remain our issues. They are the ones we grapple with in our work. We will briefly talk with the speaker about his lecture and then seek to maximize your opportunity to ask questions. Again this evening, please write your questions on the index cards which you received as you entered the hall and pass them to the center aisles. In about an hour, ushers will collect the cards and bring them backstage for presentation. Finally, following the program this evening, members of the audience are invited to join with our speaker for a reception in the lounge immediately adjacent to the rear of the hall. When we completed planning for the first 5 evenings of the series, we asked ourselves, how should this series conclude? Is it appropriate to end this series with any one earlier thinker, however seminal? For we see confronting modernity and developing a viable synthesis as an ongoing process which at different stages of our personal and intellectual development seeks to create and recreate a Jewish worldview or belief system that is viable. To discuss this ongoing process, both individually and collectively in terms of the Jewish people, to discuss the ways in which contemporary Jews continue to struggle with these spiritual issues of meaning, we have with us the Chancellor and Jacob H. Schiff Professor of History at the Jewish Theological Seminary, Dr. Gerson Cohen. Prior to his appointment as Chancellor, Dr. Cohen served the seminary as its librarian and visiting professor of Jewish institutions and Jewish literature. From 1963 to 1970, Dr. Cohen was Professor of History and Director of the Center of Israel and Jewish Studies at Columbia University. A Phi Beta Kappa graduate of City College, Dr. Cohen received his MA in Rabbinic Ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary. He earned his doctorate in Semitic languages from Columbia and has been awarded honorary degrees from NYU, Princeton, and the Graduate Center. A friend of the 92nd Street Y, Dr. Cohen eloquently delivered the 1982 State of World Jewry Address. In addition to these accomplishments and countless others far too long to recite this evening, Gerson Cohen uniquely combines the roles of scholar, teacher, writer, and institution leader. He is recognized as both being one of the most profound contemporary Jewish thinkers, possessing inordinate intellectual depth and scope, as well as a person who is learned and recognizes the realities of American Jewish life, learned from leading one of American Jewry's major institutions and movements. We are therefore particularly honored to have Dr. Cohen with us and look forward to his lecture on the ongoing process. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Gerson Cohen.
Thank you, Dr. Ruskay, Rabbi Shaw. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you caught the assurance that was imparted to me when the chairman indicated that in about an hour you will be asked to submit your cards. So that means that I can't go much beyond an hour. In any event, I'm delighted to be here and very honored to close this series on the shattered tablets and the ongoing process. In 1871, Rabbi Isaac Hirsch Weiss issued in Vienna the first of his 5-volume history of rabbinic tradition, Dor V'Dorshav. I have called it a history of rabbinic tradition, but more technically and precisely, the work is a history of exegesis of Scripture from biblical times until the beginning of the 16th century. The underlying assumption of Weiss's work was, when Moses was alone with God enveloped in the cloud on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, he was given not only the tablets and the law by which the people of Israel were to live for all time, he was also given the rules for the process by which the Torah was to be interpreted and applied in every generation. In other words, Moses received not only the Torah, he also was given the key to the application of the Torah in subsequent generations. That key, that application, is called in Hebrew midrash. And the history of the Torah is the history of the process by which it was interpreted and applied. We can go one step further. The history of Jewish culture until modern times is in large measure the story of Jewish expression in many forms, legally, artistically, literarily, philosophically, musically, as responses to challenges and needs of their time. All of them, however, formulated by the canons of the process itself. Judaism, Louis Ginsburg indicated, is the history of the exegesis or interpretation of Scripture, that is, of the tablets and of their application to life. This interpretation of Scripture is, in the view of classical Judaism, part of the original revelation given to Moses. It is accordingly as much Torah as the Torah itself. Hence, if we are to understand how the Torah was understood and applied through the ages, we must understand the rules and principles of the process which Moses was given, or which classical Judaism said that he was given, on Mount Sinai. How can we describe the tablets and the process by which these tablets were to be translated? Is there any way of characterizing the totality of the Torah without spelling out the 613 commandments in detail? Let me indicate the features that modern critical scholarship of all things has shown to be singular to ancient Israel. First, the Torah represents a covenant between a people and its God. In no other ancient civilization is there a covenant between a people and a God. The only exception possibly is that of ancient Rome. But in the ancient Near East, the God was always a chthonic or a local God. There were other gods, to be sure, but the law of the God was one that was articulated by the king or priests and was essentially tied to a place. The people played no central role. In Judaism, the Brit, the covenant, is between a people and its God. Secondly, that covenant was given in order that each and every Israelite sanctify himself and herself by sanctifying every domain of life: time, space, food, interpersonal relations. The law was given in detail to a prophet, not to a priest, not to a king. Why is that important? For when Hammurabi, for example, is shown being given the tablets by Shamash, he is given not the details of the law, but general principles which he is to formulate into law. Each king was to give what the ancients called, in a word, by the way, that's come into Hebrew, meisharim, the principles of justice. But how those laws were to be worked out was the responsibility of each ruler. In Judaism alone, the law was spelled out in detail and conveyed by the prophet. Secondly, it was not a temple law. It was a prophet who governed the priests rather than vice versa. And finally, that law was open to all who were qualified to read it and to interpret it. That is the first major characteristic of the covenant of the law, the sanctification of life. Thirdly, the process was based on a portable covenant. It was not tied to a land. It was revealed to the people of Israel outside its land, before it had conquered the country. And after it was exiled, it was portable. The covenant was portable and translatable, and remains portable and translatable with us to this very day. Fourth, the process had a telos, or a goal. It was redemption. Service of God and redemption. Redemption from Egypt, redemption from sin, redemption from exile, redemption from the sufferings of this world, ultimately. I have opened on this bibliographical, philological, theological note, for when the tablets were shattered in and by the confrontation with modernity, it was not the tablets that were shattered so much as the process and its continued relevance to the lives of most of us. Many of us still accept the Ten Commandments, indeed even much of the law that was appended to them. But we find the process for their application and change, the authority, the method, and the principles of Midrash alien and unacceptable. Not that the tablets have by now not been shattered. They have been for many. But more so was the ongoing process that was part of them. Indeed, as I hope to explain, the history of modern Jewish culture, religious reform, Zionism, socialism, Yiddishism, cultural nationalism, are outgrowths or manifestations of a search for a new process which will reflect our quest for renewal and guide us in it, and in our desire to survive as a modern people. The 19th century is a century when Jews sought a new process or new processes. Many thought they found it or them. Our own age finds itself confronted with the need to search afresh. In short, many of us do believe in or are in search of process in our Judaism. But process today means something quite different in parlance and conception from what it meant to our ancestors. I will return to this later. Isaac Hirsch Weiss, on whom I began, spent 20 years writing his history of the traditional process in the hope that he can unlock it from the deep freeze into which he felt orthodoxy had thrown it, and simultaneously retrieve it from the grave into which he felt reform had thrust it. The Torah, he said, was viable. It was the source of our collective life for many centuries and could become that again if we had the courage and the knowledge to revive it. Weiss thus denied categorically that Judaism had ever been static. The tablets had never been shattered or fossilized until relatively recently in our history. The process, the authentic process, could be set in motion again. That process was not what orthodoxy said it was, or what Marxism and modern liberal Christian anti-Judaism said it was. To Weiss, as to many modern scholars, one of the major sources of Jewish survival was the Jewish capacity to translate the tablets afresh and apply them by the principles of a living process to the world in which they lived. Every great cultural development in Judaism was a manifestation of that process. I will take only a few examples. Sometime in the 3rd century before our era, about 250 BCE, the Torah was translated into Greek by Jewish scholars of the Holy Land who went to Egypt and translated that Torah into the regnant language of the Jews of Egypt. The Torah was read in many Egyptian synagogues in Greek. And every subsequent Jewish culture translated the Bible into the dominant tongue in which Jews lived, down to our own day, where Yiddish and finally English, the Jewish Publication Society, has finally completed its own new translation of the Bible. It was Rabbi Saadia Gaon, the head of the Babylonian Academy of Surah, who translated the Bible into Arabic. Let us never forget that. It was the Jews who translated the Bible into Aramaic and made its reading mandatory for every Jew every week of the year. To take another example, the rabbinic schools of Hillel and Shammai, or Rabbi Akiba and Rabbi Ishmael in the Holy Land, were attempts to apply Scripture and the traditions they had received to their world. They were part of the living process. Later on, when the Arabs conquered the whole Near East and Islam was the dominant culture, the heads of the academies of Babylonia in Iraq, the Gaonim as they were called, translated Judaism and issued codes in Arabic, Aramaic, and Hebrew. They gave a new form of Judaism, which is finally being celebrated today in that grandiose work of scholarship, the final volume of which appeared only last month by Shlomo Dov Goitein, A Mediterranean Society. Rabbi Saadia Gaon introduced into rabbinic Judaism philosophy by making the Kalam, the regnant Arabic rationalist thought, the dominant way of rationalized Judaism and squaring it with the canons of critical thinking of his day. Later on, Maimonides would do the same thing by bringing Judaism into harmony with Neoplatonic Aristotelianism in the 12th century. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, Judaism has always been a variation on a theme. There are certain constants. The people of Israel bound to God by a covenant. The Torah, the Sabbath, circumcision, the dietary laws, our marital laws, and the centrality of the Holy Land and of the temple for certain aspects of observance, above all, as the land of promise for redemption. I say Judaism has always been a variation on a theme, but it has always been a translation of the theme, and as the rabbis put it, they walked in the footsteps of the Torah itself. When the Torah spoke of torts and damages in terms of the goring ox, they didn't only mean the goring ox. They meant your Jaguar or your Mercedes-Benz. For Dibrat Torah Bahovet, the Torah spoke in the language of its contemporary world. Dibru Chachamim Bahovet, the sages gave examples of the law from their contemporary world. And Kol Ma Shetalmid Vatik Atid Lechadesh, whatever a classified and well-qualified student discovers in the Torah had already long since been revealed to Moses and Sinai. This brings us to another aspect of the message of the tablets and the process by which the Torah was made the rule of life. It was the process that made the tablets yield not only law, but also faith, which was expressed by the categorical rabbinic term Agadah. But Agadah includes not only legend, it includes philosophy and how the Torah has to be applied to one's heart and to one's mind. As early as the 1st century of our era, a Jew recognized that the Torah must be brought to the intellectual Greek world and made palatable to those who were schooled in Stoic morality. Philo of Alexandria issued his great works of philosophy, which are basically commentaries or excursuses on aspects of the Torah. As I indicated, Rab Saadia Gaon discovered Kalam, and very shortly we are to have a work by Professor Moses Zucker, which will show that other Gaonim like Shmuel ben Chofni wrote extensively in the idiom of Arabic Kalam philosophy. Ibn Gabirol wrote a work of philosophy which was so Neoplatonic that when it was translated into Latin and his words and his name was misspelt as Avichebron, the real author was forgotten and was considered to be a Christian. It was only by coincidence that in the middle of the 19th century, Solomon Munk discovered that Avichebron was a corruption of Ibn Gabirol, and that the Fons Vitae of Avichebron was the work of a Jew. What I want to indicate is that the word never had a word of Christianity in it, nor a word of Judaism. It bespoke philosophy as every man could believe in his day. Maimonides indicated that he was an avid student, not only of Avicenna, but also of Averroes. The process, philosophy, Agadah, always made Judaism contemporary. Jew and Christian, Jew and Muslim could reject each other totally. Paradoxically, they shared fundamental premises thanks to the tablets and the process. This process and its faith are best summarized by Maimonides' statement in the Guide to the Perplexed, Book 3, Chapter 51, where he says what religion is all about. Let me read it to you. I shall read only portions. This chapter that we bring now does not include additional matter over and above what is comprised in other chapters of the treatise. It is only a kind of conclusion, at the same time explaining the worship as practiced by one who has apprehended the true realities peculiar only to him, to God, after he has obtained an apprehension of what God is. I shall begin this discourse in this chapter with a parable that I shall compose for you. Maimonides says he made it up. I say then, the ruler is in his palace, and all his subjects are partly within the city and partly outside the city. Of those who are within the city, some have turned their backs upon the ruler's habitation, their faces being turned another way. Others seek to reach the ruler's habitation, turn toward it, and desire to enter it and to stand before him. But up to now, they have not even yet seen the wall of the habitation. Some of those who seek to reach it have come up to the habitation and walk around it searching for the gate. Some of them have entered the gate and walk about in the antechambers. Some of them have entered the inner court of the habitation and have come to be with the king in one and the same place with him, namely in the ruler's habitation. I will stop here with this brief little parable. What I want to indicate is, of course, is that what we have here is the parable of the castle. There was always a castle in Judaism, beginning with Psalm 15, which says, O Lord, who may stay in your tent? Who may reside on your holy mountain? In other words, there was a tent of God, a holy mountain, which man could ascend. This was reflected later on in the rabbinic tract of Heichalot, which described the actual home dwelling place of God's dwelling place. Now the castle inevitably brings to mind Franz Kafka. Kafka, as I'm sure many of you here know, studied Maimonides and made notes on the Guide to the Perplexed. He must have known this parable, and I dare even suggest been inspired by Maimonides' version of the castle. I am aware from students of 19th century German literature that the theme of der Schloss, the castle, as the symbol of the institutions governing and directing society and culture, was employed by several writers who preceded Kafka. In other words, Kafka could have been inspired for his unfinished work by several other writers. Maimonides, I submit, should not be ruled out. But whether my suggestion is historically plausible to you or not is really immaterial. What is, I believe, undeniable is the mutually exclusive and contradictory messages of the two parables of the castle, that of Maimonides and that of Kafka. For Kafka's castle and Maimonides' castle, when placed side by side, a mirror of our Jewish condition today, of the shattered tablets. To Kafka, there is no doubt that there is a castle up there, overtowering, overlooking, and determining the destiny of all of us. It haunts us, for it is the master, or it houses the master of our fate. In this he agrees with Maimonides, but there is one crucial difference. Maimonides had no doubt that there is an opening and there is a key to the castle that can be found, and that the castle can be entered by anyone who lives by the process and proceeds in its path of life step by step. Few may ever gain access to the innermost chamber, but some have, and their example holds out promise for each of us. We can hope to experience the blessing articulated in the Talmud, Olamcha tir'eh b'chayecha, may you experience eternity within your own lifetime. Maimonides says in his code, do not be under the illusion that the world to come is a world outside this world or a world of the future. It is here and present, available to whoever would strive and pursue it. Maimonides describes his own mystical experience in the introduction to the guide, leaving no doubt that he had gotten beyond the outer gate of the castle. The path is open to you and me, which is why he tells us at the beginning of his quote by quoting a verse, what he tells us at the beginning of his quote by a verse quoted from Psalm 119. Az lo evosh b'habiti el kol mitzvotecha. Then will I not be religiously disappointed, evosh, frustrated, when I regard and contemplate all of your commandments. It is the totality of the Torah and the performance of the totality that gives man the promise of salvation. Maimonides' son Abraham composed a book entitled Kifayat al-Abidin, a summa on the batin in Arabic, namely the esoteric meaning and purpose of the Torah. Abraham, the son of Maimonides, adopted many of the ways of the dominant mystical movement of his day, that is of Sufism. He wore a hair shirt for his underwear as part of his self-flagellation. Judaism, Abraham Maimonides tells us, when lived authentically, was a Sufi-like faith, possible only for the few. But those were the ones who counted, for they understood the Torah's meaning and understood the process, which is Torah. Hence, Torah is not only law and commandments, or mitzvot, but a way of spiritual ecstasy, fulfillment, and salvation. In one way or another, these orientations to faith and the religious life continue to control the religious and intellectual leadership, the communal institutions, and the life of the normal individual Jew until about 300 years ago. One interesting aside. Thanks to the studies of Solomon Schechter and of Gershom Scholem and his disciples, we know of the major metamorphosis that Jewish religion underwent after the expulsion from Spain, particularly in the city of Safed. It was there that Kabbalah, mysticism, assumed new dimensions and became the basis of a new notion of God, and the process of theology was transmuted. Why? Why this major upheaval in Safed? In response to a Holocaust, to the expulsion from Spain and Portugal. But when the Kabbalah of Safed in the 16th century wanted to express the trauma that had befallen the Jewish people, they spoke not of the shattered tablets, but of the shattered vessels of the Godhead itself. Not that the tablets or the process had been injured, according to them, but God himself had suffered trauma in the cosmic rupture that lay at the very bottom of the condition of the universe and of man ever since the beginning of history. But this did not make man helpless, let alone useless. On the contrary, this situation gave man, more accurately the people of Israel, a special role. Let us be more specific. It gave the process at the heart of which these scholars put Kabbalah a special function, a double function. First, to achieve mystical bliss individually through the performance of Torah and contemplation. Secondly, more important and more daring, to restore God, the shattered God, to wholeness and the very creation to its pristine form and balance. Man, the Jew, the Torah, the process, all had renewed roles vis-a-vis the castle and its master. Every mitzvah redeemed a divine spark. Man is as important as God, almost. In reality, at least as important in restoring God to his primal place. To return to our modern situation so hauntingly portrayed for us by Kafka and his midrashim on the ruler of the universe and of the judgment that that ruler imposes on us, the trial. Kafka tells us, I think, that we live in a demonic situation. There is no way of making a meaningful connection with the castle. The universe is, when viewed candidly, a madhouse, and can only drive the one who tries to make meaningful connections to distraction and frustration. A castle? Yes, but one that will only drive us berserk. That is the current human condition, and its diagnosis of Judaism by implication is that it is a dance of madmen to no purpose or avail. The modern anti-Semite says we are heirs to a tradition that is legalistic, separatistic, particularistic. He says in modern times what Jewish tradition always said of us. For centuries, however, we bore our legalism, separatism, and particularism proudly and snorted with contempt at the complaints about these characteristics. But now we have begun to believe the anti-Semite, at least we have for 180 years. Why? We have lost one basic element in the process, and that is our eschatology, our hope for redemption in the future, our messianic hope, as we call it. For the tablets in our modern view are shattered. More important, the process that the tablets bespoke is utterly dead. Paradoxically, the tablets have been shattered by freedom, by citizenship, by the opening of the roads that would accept the Jew into the family of man. But they were also shattered by a loss of faith in the process itself. Moses Mendelssohn reduced Judaism to a religion. But if a religion is what we really are, we can find it elsewhere at lesser cost and with greater returns. Or to take the different consequences of modernity. Religion is not necessarily meaningless, yet it has lost its objective mandate. For religion is a psychological state or phenomenon, not a revealed body of truths and commands. Indeed, religion is a private affair, so that it has lost its power to wellness into a religious Gemeinschaft, or community of kinship, expressed in Hebrew by the word Am Yisrael, meaning a people who are related to each other. With the loss of the tablets and the ongoing process, we lost a further element in our culture, and that was the integrative function that the tablets and the process played. For the tablets and the process made us into a community with a culture that we have lost now that they are shattered and dead. The tablets made a connection between our ethnic identity, that is our community, and our art and our ethics. Yes, there was always a Jewish art, a poetry, forms of rhythmic movement or dance at prayer, at celebration or mourning that we may call dance. And above all, we always had a music of our own. When our ancestors recited poetry and sang, they were expressing by ritual and custom their mission as God's chosen people. They were extending their experience of sanctity to time, space, life, food, and interpersonal relations. They did not begin placing emphasis on song with the singing of the Kabbalat Shabbat and Zmirot that we associate so properly with Safed. Singing did not begin at Safed. It goes back to the Psalms and continued right down to modern times. Indeed, one Roman poet described what it was to walk in the Jewish quarter on a Friday night. What you hear, he said, is song mixed with smoke belching from a window, mingled with the stink of tunny fish. That's a kind of sardine. Jews couldn't afford gefilte fish or chicken, but they could sing Zmirot and they lighted candles. Donash ben Labrat of the 10th century, the court poet of Chasdayim Shaprut, wrote a little Hebrew poem that is still sung in many a home in Hebrew. Dror yikra leveinim bat, v'yintzorchem kemo vavat. Freedom, he will proclaim, for man and woman, and he will guard you like the apple of his eye. Notice, there is a Jewish home with a song. They speak not only of the Sabbath, but of freedom, dror,
so that the Sabbath thus became a concert, and all of its elements were connected. Food, leisure, family, study, music. The Jewish home was decorated in the Middle Ages, Rashi tells us, with paintings of David and Goliath, meaning that art in the Jewish home is not a purely modern phenomenon. Beauty was a dimension in the process itself, as we know how the rabbis translated in the Song of Moses, Zeh Livan Vehu, this is my God, and I shall give him a home. They said, I shall give him beauty. Our tablets are shattered, and their beauty-giving function has consequently been lost. How do I know? By the concerts that I attend and the art that I observe today. Art is bespoken to me today by Jackson Pollock, by Marc Chagall, by Picasso, by Larry Rivers and his mother-in-law. That is art. Perhaps it is not all of art, but it is nevertheless an acceptable part of art. It need not be connected with any other part of our lives to be acceptable and respected, and indeed command high prices. My concert experience is especially devoid of integration with the remainder of my life. It begins with an overture by Rossini or Weber, goes to a concerto by Mozart or Beethoven, and then to a piece by Hindemith or Ives or Bartók. There is no connection between one element, one component, and another, except music itself. Each part, as my Bubba would have said, klebt sich wie ein Arbes zum Wand, sticks like a chickpea to a wall. Beauty in our art and our music and our poetry is an autonomous dimension, not an extension of every other dimension. No two pieces in that concert need be related to each other, and none of the totality of the concert be related to any other dimension of life. For $25 a throw, you can sit immobile and passive in a music box, silent except for the paroxysms of coughing that characterize the last movement of the last piece. We are living in dimensions that are each free of each other, as we are in the autonomous synagogue, the ballet, yes, and the autonomous domain of literature. Each of them has one role, and that is to entertain us and reflect the creativity of the artist. Fiction has replaced midrash. In fiction, we find emotion and beauty, insight and stimulation, but ultimately the mirror of one's person's mind and perception of the human condition. It has no mandate. It need not provide us with any goal in life. We are transported into a contrived world, one that is not part of any process other than reaffirmation of man's freedom. Art is not, or of man's creative powers. Art is not a mirror of eschatology, as were the pictures of David and Goliath, or of duty, as art was in the synagogues and cathedrals of the Middle Ages until recent times. The tablets are now shattered along with the process, and yet the quest for retrieval in the tablets and for the process continues. We are looking for a process or for a surrogate that will fill the void. Part of that void is reflected in the very change in the meaning of the word itself. In the 19th century, actually in the one before it in the 18th, the word took on in certain intellectual circles a new meaning. It began to mean not the way by which man should shape his patrimony, but the laws and inner dynamics of history that govern man whether he likes it or not. Process came to mean the processes of history as of physics and other aspects of life. Giambattista Vico is the father of this new meaning and understanding of the history of culture. Each culture goes through three stages, Vico said. The age of the gods, the age of the heroes, the age of man, and then finally suffers the death of its culture through the process itself. Process now means not the laws by which men are required to live, but the law that determines our lives. Everyone who has read Edmund Wilson's To the Finland Station or Sir Isaiah Berlin's Vico and Herder knows what process came to mean in the 19th century. The ultimate exponents of the new meaning of process were the Marxists, many of whose representatives came to be intellectuals of the Jewish community itself. Walking in Vico's footsteps are those formidable investigators of history of modern times, Oswald Spengler, Pittram, Sorokin, Arnold J. Toynbee. But this notion of process is not one that remained outside the Jewish community. It affected the Jewish community's intellectuals from early in the 19th century, more specifically from 1840, with the publication of Nachman Krochmal's book, Moreh Nevuchei Hazman, Guide to the Perplexed of Our Time. Krochmal saw three stages in the cyclical division of Jewish history, and the likelihood is that he got it from a German translation or was inspired by a German translation of Vico. In Krochmal's view, Israel was unique in one way, not in the fact that it could avoid cyclicality. That was unavoidable. Israel was unique in that it alone could enjoy continued rebirth after each cycle. It could not overcome cycles. It could elude death. Gretz also saw process as part of the law of Jewish history. What happened was that process changed with what Professor Frank Manuel has so aptly called the change of the gods. We are subjects of a process today, not its custodians. Our leadership has lost faith in the uniqueness of our people and its culture, or its power to transcend the laws governing all other peoples and cultures, a faith which Krochmal affirmed. And yet we continue to look for ways that will give us a new lease on life, a renewed community, survival. We contrive causes that would give meaning to everything, for the God that governs everything in our vocabulary is Jewish survival. In the name of the new processes, we did establish new forms of tablets and processes of our own. For a while, we had several such media of expression: socialism, Zionism, religious reform, and I include conservative Judaism and neo-Orthodoxy as well. But these have lost their energy and mobilizing forces in our day. Accordingly, we have formed, I would say, contemporary golden calves, which we worship as though they were tablets in process. Let me indicate that modern scholarship has pretty much established that the golden calf made under Mount Sinai was not considered a god. It was considered a podium for the Godhead to descend upon. For we have such golden bulls from other cultures, and their meaning is very clear. What are our golden calves? At the head of that list today are Jewish philanthropy, Israel for others, liberal causes, the right to die, the right to live, the right to abortion, and so forth, federations and their institutions, hospitals and family services. Let me make it very clear. These are all good works, and works which I think we should support. Good works were always part of the Jewish tradition, but they mask our real situation. The second golden calf is nostalgia. At the top of the list there is the Holocaust, expressed in Fiddler on the Roof and Yentl as classic prophetic statements of what the Jewish tradition is about. Jewish studies in America emphasize the Holocaust above all, wherever you leave New York City, and even in certain parts of New York City. These are indeed integrative forces, but their speciousness is reflected in the fact that the Holocaust, for example, has generated no real liturgy, as did the destruction of the temple, or the First Crusade, and even the expulsion from Spain. We are left speechless in front of art and photographs. We can say Kaddish or listen to a chazan recite the El Malei Rachamim, but we do not recite new piyut and incorporate it into our consciousness and our liturgy. A third aspect of our new quest for tablets and process is the disguised restoration of the Jewish belief in magic and vicarious religious fulfillment. We support gurus whose way of life we will not adopt, but we will support them for our children and for others. We support institutions that sustain others, particularly our children, in a way that we hope will make them immune to the challenges of the contemporary world. The quest, even among us, for religion, of course, continues. How do I know? The Book of the Month Club of this last month can market Father Hans Küng's Eternal Life, reflecting the truth of Professor Texidor's thesis that philosophers come and theologians go, but religion remains for the masses fundamentally unchanged and unchangeable. The masses have always looked for the same things from religion: peace of mind, fertility, life after death, and above all, survival through our children. But let us face it, this quest for intellectual peace with the world, not only the old tablets and process are, in this quest, not only are the old tablets and process shattered, but the modern efforts of the 19th century have all to replace them have also been shattered as well. Let me go over that again. Not only have the old tablets and processes been shattered, but the modern efforts of the 19th century to replace them with new tablets, which for a while did capture the imaginations of great masses, have been shattered as well. That is reflected most painfully to me personally, at least, in what I think is the shattering of classical Zionism. Zionism has been both the glory and indeed the salvation of the Jewish people, and its tragedy. Let me summarize the meaning of Zionism as I understand it in two brief phrases. First, it was determined to give the Jews control of their own destiny. Second of all, was determined that the Jews would reconquer their old self-esteem by forging new tablets and new translations of life, which included the rebirth of the Hebrew language, Hebrew literature, the land of Israel, and the conquest of the land through labor and soil, and above all, self-defense, so the Jews would not be dependent on others for their protection. In short, it sought Jewish freedom as a form of a new eschatology, a new messianic redemption. Let me say at once categorically that for me, personally, Israel is still the most spiritually fertile country that I know. Its scholarship and the spirit in its streets are overwhelming. But alas, that is what the Irishman reflected about the Nike, the Winged Victory, in the Louvre. If you've seen the Winged Victory, with her broken head and shattered breasts and fragmented arms, you will understand the Irishman's reaction. If that's the victory, I'd hate like hell to see the guy that got licked. Israel today has become a political phenomenon, and tragically, its politics are not only internal, but are also reflected externally, as well as by its emphasis on military might, or at least that is how the world perceives it. Zionism seems to have lost its connection with Jewish history. For many Israeli children and even intellectuals are tragically unfamiliar with their real roots, the diaspora. There has even been an effort in a country which is renowned for its Jewish scholarship to rewrite Jewish history as the history of a people on its own land, reflecting a total lack of appreciation for the creativity of the diaspora, and for the need for a continued partnership with it, not only for its physical safety, but for its spiritual vitality. This leads to a lack of a Jewish appreciation of Jewish culture through the ages, and above all, of its continuity through Israel. Who is to blame for this shattering of these great modern tablets? Who is to blame for the shattering of Zionism as an eschatology? What's the difference? Suffice it to say that we are in a bad way. One might say that so is America. So is American eschatology and the perception of its mission. But we Jews can afford it less. Is there any real ray of hope? Yes, I believe there is, but that requires courage to stare reality in the face and to diagnose our situation. Here the past can be instructive. Only by candid diagnosis of our conditions and by acts of faith, and to me faith means commitment, can we mend the tablets and restore to ourselves a process with a mission. Let me indicate what I mean by certain references to historical precedents. Hasidism, to which part of this series was devoted, was born out of what I would call a collective deep depression of the Jewish people, which the Hasidic masters overcame through an introduction of a sense of mission, which gave the Jew joy as a partner of the Almighty. It may be that Professor Arthur Green was right in saying that Hasidism displaced theology from an objective study to a psychological state. But the fact of the matter is that the psychological state was opposite and relevant to the needs of its time. Out of the sense of depression grew an enormous force which in Jewish life, which, by the way, generated counter forces in Eastern Europe of intellectuality and the faith in Jewish process. This new faith, this counter faith, generated tablets which I regret are not celebrated enough. Let me mention a few. They were mended or constructed, forged by builders of people who saw the need for tablets and process. One of them was Chaim of Volozhin, a disciple of the Gaon of Vilna, who attempted to establish an institution to forge and mold the new East European Jewish gentleman through the first national yeshiva in the city of Volozhin. The second, in a way, was Nachman Krochmal himself, who thought that by unraveling the processes of Jewish history, he might restore some control over that process by a modern midrash. Thirdly, there was the Hebrew Enlightenment, the Haskalah, which sought to reestablish self-esteem by a reconquest of a living literature and by appropriation and Judaization of the culture of the world. Fourth, there was socialist Yiddishism, which gave a new eschatology, secularized eschatology, but nonetheless a collective purpose to the Jews of Eastern Europe. In Germany, there was Franz Rosenzweig, who certainly attempted to mend the tablets and to find a new medium to express the process which would motivate Jewish life. Solomon Schechter in England and in this country tried to restore the tablets of rabbinic Judaism by affirming their validity in the face of Christianity and secularism. He was as much an opponent of Christianity as he was of reform. But his purpose was to renew the tablets. Professor Mordecai M. Kaplan sought to do that too. And if none of them has yet really caught or continues to catch the flaming imagination of the intellectual leadership of our country, except as bibliographical items or venerated memories, perhaps it is because they and we have not yet found the proper idiom, the proper religious way, the proper process, and a candid eschatology. At this point, Safed stares me in the face. Safed declares that I am a partner of God, and we must have a mission and live by it as partners of God. If the condition of Hasidism was collective depression, which the Hasidic masters overcame, we, it seems to me, often live in a state of collective despair and rage, which is counterproductive for us and the community at large. We have good reason for rage. We have good reason for despair with all our wealth, but it is counterproductive. We live in a state of extreme individualism and ritual embarrassment. We live in a world, in a world of the coma of eschatology. We cannot have a Judaism that survives by being paid off by others, by nostalgia, by philanthropy, or by building institutions for others. We must assume a discipline that will restore a sense of election and mission. What is the process of which I speak? I speak of a midrash born of scholarship combined with conscience. I speak of a midrash that embraces the totality of Jewish experience and distills from it religious elements and interprets them as guides to life and to action of our day. We will find resistance from some observant, some unobservant. We will find resistance on subjects that are sensitive, like patrilineal descent, conversion, or medical ethics, or ritual details. But we must have the courage to have a midrash that grows out of the past and connects us to that past and yet responds to the present. That is not done in a day. It is done by the investment of generations and of people who are, and by forces that show that the people who do respond to it will be taken seriously. Without midrash, we have no text. And without a text, we have no roots or process. Secondly, we must face up to the fact of freedom. Freedom is the blessing that we have inherited. But freedom can also bespeak chaos and void, unguided and uncharted path, which we must confront. Our literature is not a literature born out of freedom, and therefore we have no midrash on a state of freedom. Finally, we must assume that we are not second-class Jews in the creation and articulation of the process. Why do I believe that we, American Jews, are capable of this? Why do I believe that the Jewish people is capable of this? Paradoxically, because I'm something of an armchair pseudo-Freudian. I believe in the return of the repressed. I believe that the primal experience of a people as of an individual will determine the collective group's perception of life and of its orientation to the future. We were born out of a quest for freedom. We were born out of a quest for spirit in alien soil. And we were born with the determination to apply that through midrash wherever we were. We can recapture this beginning, I believe, if we are determined to do it and are not too embarrassed. I believe that we are in America, above all, must do it out of freedom and out of a sense of responsibility to our brethren in Israel and in other parts of the world. Above all, I think we must overcome our ritual indolence and embarrassment without becoming adherents of a vapid ritual. We must do what our grandparents and great-parents did as a matter of daily rule of life: study and apply. I think you think so as well. I think you agree with me that somehow we can have an ongoing process of our own A new process which is one that celebrates not only tragedy, not only one more attempt at an assertion of an ancient message, but one that can reestablish a sense of the election and function of the eschatology of the community as a whole. If you did not believe so, you probably would not have come tonight. Thank you.
You're on now. Very close. You want to study on the
57. It's 57.
the basketball too. I think I remember Cynthia responded once by saying, I think I need a week to think about this and then come back. This has been an extraordinary tour de force, and one that generates enormous thinking along the way, which each of the different issues, as well as with the entirety. I want to try one question, unbelievably, to try to understand the concluding aspect, or the concluding section. I remember reading an article some years ago, Dr. Cohen, which I think was entitled The Commander and the Commandment, which fundamentally said, can there be commandment? Can there be mitzvah without a commander? Once one gives up a sense of supernatural God, if one has a sense that these commandments are from God, how does one have mitzvah, how does one have halakha without commander, without believing in that? So my question is, if you are calling for a new midrash, coping with freedom, I suppose seeking the integration that you magnificently alluded to when you discussed art and music so well, and maybe that's a piece of that as a search for monotheism, that integrative function. Can we have midrash if, for those people that have that when they say the tablets have been shattered, it means in part that there may not be for them that commander above? Then there's no authority. You pick and choose whatever aspect of the tradition that one does midrash on. You respond to your own environment. In other words, midrash came from a body, an integrative body of which individuals responded. How do we do midrash for those that no longer have that authority structure?
I want to say that claim that there may not be a lawgiver is as ancient as the Midrash itself. The 14th Psalm begins, Amar naval belibo ein Elohim. The rake says in his heart, there is no God. I know the JPS translates it, God doesn't care. They just, I suppose, couldn't get to translate those words properly. The fact of the matter is that if there is no, whether there is a God or there is a God, or there is no God, it really is immaterial if God doesn't care. That's true. Now, I'm going to say, ultimately, we're going to have to make one statement again of commitment, of staking our existence on the fact that a law has been revealed to us, or a law has been revealed to all men in all times, to the extent that they are capable of grasping it. There has also been resistance to that revelation since ancient times. I can't prove it as I can that water, or if I knew how to, I could, that water consists of 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. That is not what religious faith is. Religious faith, Paul Tillich said, is ultimate concern. I'm saying it's ultimate staking of one's existence on a proposition. If there is no God, if there is no revealed law, then you have no canons for judgment or condemnation or praise for any Jewish value, except sentiment. I like chont, except that chont is dangerous for me. Now, I want to say to you the fact that, therefore, if you ask me, that is why Kaplan ultimately, I think, was unable to conquer the Jewish community except in a negative way. As a student of his, and one who regards himself privileged to have been a student of his, and one who thinks that Reconstructionism enriched and profoundly transmuted every corner of Jewish life, I want to say that ultimately he was not capable of capturing people because they sought one statement of authority and comfort of what the philosophers called consolatio from him, consolation. And that is, there is a God who reveals and who cares. And therefore he was only able to say not 13 Jewish beliefs, but 13 Jewish wants. Kaplan understood that there's a need for a text in the Midrash. He devoted his life to Midrash. But as you are right, if the text is not rooted in authority, what's the point of the Midrash? That's where I think, alas, he was not able to do that. Rosenzweig was. But Rosenzweig, of course, lived too short a life. His influence was confined in a specific period, but he had an enormous influence through the Lehrhaus, as you know, through his translations, and through his charisma, right through his terrible illness on many people. He bespoke authority. By the way, he did not bespeak observance. The famous statement, do you put on tefillin? Not yet. It's not no. It's not yet. It wouldn't be yes without understanding why he should. But he understood the need to wrestle with God, as Jacob of old did.
Dr. Cohen, in terms of the idols you talked about, Jewish philanthropy, Israel, liberal causes, and so forth, one methodology which you used might also be put in that category, at least some people do, which is historical method, and the Wissenschaft school, which, while enormously illuminating, can also be reductionist. And I would wonder if the analytic mode, which so many of us are attracted to, and which in a sense fits the modern temper, isn't on some fundamental level opposed to personal piety and inwardness. You talk about God, and I'm moved by your words about God, but how do you combine this form of scientific methodology with that form of Jewish inwardness and personal piety, which is essential for Jewish culture?
All right, I think you've jumped a step. I was just about to agree with you when you took it away. Let me say the following. Wissenschaft, the escape into archaeology and into the past, can be a surrogate for religious quest. In other words, if I spend my life writing the history of the Dagesh Kal in the city of Lucena from 1147 to 1148, and I turn up some new data on the Dagesh Kal, I may have enriched my understanding of the Dagesh Kal, but it's diverted me from ever contemplating ultimate issues. You're right. And many Jews sought their past, I should say, I suppose, in a way of eliminating the need to confront the present. I want to add one word of caution. It's easy to condemn the people of Wissenschaft for not confronting theology. But their first mandate was to recapture Jewish self-esteem. And they were told by a new form of anti-Semitism, which began with Diderot and Voltaire. You see, Diderot, Voltaire, the philosophes, the deists knew, we Jews don't use blood for matzahs, but we are still a repulsive people because we have no culture. The Wissenschaft people tried to restore a sense of Jewish culture. First, Zunz, Leopold Zunz, deliberately did not investigate Spanish Hebrew poetry. He investigated the poetry the Jews of Germany were embarrassed with, the Ashkenazic poetry, with its angelology, its eschatology, its ritualism. And Zunz said that's a valid form of artistic expression.
And we had better recapture it if we want to have some art of our own. Above all, he wanted to show that we have a past. For it was claimed the Jews have no history. They have no enduring culture. We live without change. Now that's a fundamental tenet of orthodoxy. The Torah has never changed. Wissenschaft showed that we are a historic people. We are a cultured people. We've been part of that world. So if they sought to avoid confrontation with the present, I would say it was not that all the time, so much as a desperate need to give people a past on which to base, to provide a podium for the confrontation with the present. Secondly, and this to me is equally important, we have only had 200 years of experience of critical study of that form of comparative religion. That's a very short period for a people with 3,000 years of tradition. And to transmute ourselves and come to terms with a new mode of thinking is easier said than done. Therefore, I want to say, yes, we should be confronting the present as well as the past. The past must not be escaped from the present, but let no study of the present be without roots in solid academic research. Our knowledge, our reconquest of the past has been revolutionary in the past 175 years. And one of the good excuses that a lot of scholars have for ignoring contemporary Jewish theology is that the theologians ignore the research. They ignore what we have discovered. I believe I said in my talk that our midrash must be based on knowledge and conscience. It must be based on critical study of the past. You can't just say that Antiochus came in, a wicked king, and tried to Hellenize all the Jews. You have to ask yourself, as Bickerman did, why did he want to Hellenize us and not every other people? You have to begin to study the situations. Why were the Maccabees hated by many pious Jews? We don't often talk about that. So therefore, we don't realize that the rabbis were not always in agreement. And we speak of that myth of Jewish unity when you know that Hillel and Shammai didn't agree about the time of day. Therefore, I'm saying, we must confront the present. You are right. But our knowledge of the present, our study of the present, can only be based on the experience of the new revelation of knowledge that has been opened up to us through the ancient Near East, through the medieval world, and through the contemporary world, so that we understand what acculturation in Jewish history has been, what has been the blessing of our adaptability and our ability to absorb without losing our own identity. I therefore maintain, to use a midrashic expression, we have to hold the rope on by both ends. And that's the only way we'll ever be able to achieve the real circle in which we can operate as Jews.
If the questions are brought up, we'll begin to ask them, so I'm not sure where they are.
Hold on, I have another question.
I have one question too, and then we'll ask two quick questions. One, I was with you almost all the way.
I'm sorry?
And I was with you all the way of your talk, and then when you talked about the void, and you suggested filling it, in a sense, with a kind of midrash, and a kind of midrash born in freedom, I wanted to ask you privately later tonight, can that really do it?
Privately, huh?
Can that really fill, if the tablets are shattered, and if the awesome traditional system, even though it wasn't fully shared by all people, if you are correct, and that is somewhat shattered, and if socialism and Zionism and religious reform from neo-orthodoxy over to reform are themselves having failed or in the process thereof, can a notion of a law and then a midrash born in freedom and equality, in a sense, really fill this colossal void?
Yes.
All right.
And I will tell you.
I want to thank you, Dr. Cohen. No.
Since you asked me a private question, I'm going to give you a private answer. Yes. We have done it before, and we can do it again. And I will give you one example. When an old man like Aleph Dalet Gordon
in medieval life is able to find some kind of new cosmic meaning for his Jewishness, which may be pantheistic, I don't care, may be terolatrous to some extent, but it included Musar, Midot, as much as Rabbi Salanter wanted them. It included the transmutation of the person in his relations with other human beings. Then I am saying, if such a small group could form a group of the Chalutzim, who had enormous power over us by their spirituality, by their mastery of Scripture, and by their determination to give new life to Jewish tradition. If a few could do it, maybe a few can do it better than a lot. But then within this group, we have to cultivate and encourage the select few who will be our leaders and will articulate the way for us.
Steve?
Dr. Cohen, history for the Jew has traditionally been the sphere where God acts out his divine plan. In this schema of traditional Jewish history where God acts out his divine plan, the Jew has a very special role to play. As someone, and you've demonstrated that aptly both here and in other fora, someone trained in the craft of secular history, how do you make the bridge to sacred history? In what sense does God act out in this realm, and how do you understand the traditional concept of God's chosen people?
You see, I have no problem with the first part of the question because it's all Christian.
Well,
now let me explain to you. History is, to me, not the drama where God acts out his plan. History, to me, is also the story of man's rebellion against God's plan. And if the history were all the acting out of God's plan, then he's made one hell of a mess of it. But I want to say the following. That, this business of categorizing history as the stage on which the divine plan is enacted. These are shibboleths that come from Protestant theologians of the 19th and 20th century. They are not Jewish vocabulary. That doesn't mean they don't have authenticity. I can only tell you I don't find them attractive. Second of all, this notion of sacred history, Heilsgeschichte, which means soteric history, saving history, salvation, is again a non-Jewish concept, a non-Jewish notion. Our history includes the history of humanity and the history of human grappling with the divine message, or for the history of the human effort for retrieving the divine message. History, to me, is the study of how people have behaved in their search for or in their confrontation with the divine mandate. It is not, as you said, therefore I don't have a problem with it. The study of history merely explains to me how I came to be here tonight, and to understand how we can have this series and how we can all be partners in one of the greatest spiritual sagas in the history of mankind, as far as I'm concerned, Jewish rebirth in Israel and here. That's history. But that comes not only out of material goods, it comes out of the spirit. How do I know? Israel won its wars by its morale. And you can see today what fanaticism is doing to the Muslim world. And you can see what Vietnam has left us with in the United States and the loss of spirit. Somehow we have to recapture that spirit. And therefore I am saying that history cannot be categorized in any one way. It is the basis for self-recognition.
We'll take several quick questions that are on the cards, two related to your comments about the Holocaust. To categorize Holocaust studies as nostalgia is strong medicine, especially for the survivors and their families. How do you suggest that this generation, orphanated by the cataclysmic events of Europe, how should they study and understand and midrashicize the decimation of one-third of the Jewish people in the world?
let me add to that. You talked about two parallel catastrophes. I always wanted to ask him questions. I know. two parallel catastrophes: the destruction of the first and second temples, of the second temple, and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, both of which you claimed led to a certain midrashic process, which ultimately made them redemptive in a sense. As far as I know, it took at least 100 years for that to happen after, no? Well, it took some time, more than 30 years, I would assume, for that to happen with Spain. I really don't know the details in terms of time span after the temple. Aren't we too close to the event? Why is it impossible to make a midrash on the Holocaust?
I don't say it's impossible. We haven't done it. I'm complaining that we haven't done it. The only one who's really tried seriously, there are two. Eliezer Berkovitz and Emil Fackenheim. Now, Emil Fackenheim, I've tried to understand and can't. That may be my failing. But Berkovitz gives and sends a traditional rabbinic answer of the book of Job. That's not one to be taken lightly, but ultimately doesn't satisfy me. Let me explain quite specifically my own position with regard to the Holocaust. One, I plead, don't blackmail me with such words. How dare you say it's nostalgia? In other words, that's the kind of blackmail that stifles conversation. I gave myself a birthday present last year. I happened to be in Amersfoort, Holland, and I therefore was able to take 4 days to go to see the communities of the Rhineland, on which I have been doing research because of the effect, attempting to study the effect of the First Crusade on Jewish liturgy. But then I decided for my birthday to give myself a real treat. I flew to Dachau, and I spoke there. I can only tell you that the experience was indescribable. Along with thousands of people, thousands, many wearing yarmulkes, I walked around like many others, just saying Kaddish all day long. I had no answer. I do know that I had to experience it. It is part of my experience not to recognize it. It's simply to be false to the reality. To make it the central doctrine of my teaching is to overlook 2,000 years of Jewish culture, or 3,000 years, because those 3,000 years are meaningless to me. I'm sorry. I have to grapple with every aspect of Jewish experience. The Holocaust is one of those indescribable traumas which we must experience again and again. But to make it central may be a little bit uncharitable to those who are not willing to confront the totality of Jewishness. It's not simply that you can't master more than one subject, but you can take account of them. I think it is the duty of every Jew who has the opportunity to go to Birkenau, Auschwitz, Majdanek, or someplace like that. Stand there and remove your shoes, because it is holy soil. But I felt very much like that way when I stood at the bottom of the mikveh at Cologne. And I remember what went through my head. How dare they tell me this is not my country? My ancestors were here before they were. Now I understand realities. And I understand why the German government has now made the mikveh a national shrine. I'm not fooled by it either. But I do want this to know. Isaac Hirsch Weiss, who wrote in Hebrew, was not a political Zionist because he said the whole world belongs to us. Now, I think that's a mistake. Or history has proven it to be a mistake. It's a moot question now. What I want to say is that the Holocaust is something we must study with all candor, scientifically, not sentimentally only, but that a scientific study should give us the kind of midrash and piyut that will generate sentiments that are truly authentic and profound and enduring.
What are the, on quite another vein, what are the differences, the similarities, and why do we lose so many Jews to meditation, guru style, which is very receiving of sustenance and joyous making? I suppose it's saying, in a sense, given the void, why do we seem to lose so many Jews to those spiritual movements throughout America?
Because we have no eschatology. Let me here point out something which I don't think is generally well known. In the 13th century, Sufism ran wild over the whole Near East, and many Jews were caught up with it. We have a pathetic letter from a woman to Abraham, the son of Maimonides, complaining that her husband has abandoned her and will not support their children. When Abraham Amuni confronted him, he replied, "I'm too busy contemplating. I sit in a Sufi camp which doesn't discriminate against me because of my creed or my origins. I am contemplating God." And Abraham Amuni told him, "Derech eretz kadma leTorah." Your duties to the world precede your duties to the Torah. If you're going to have any kind of Torah, any kind of authentic contemplation, you owe it as community. That's, of course, a premise. We run away into solitude as people did in every generation. There have been hermits we know of. By the way, there were Buddhist missionaries in Alexandria in the 1st century. We know of the Dead Sea Scroll, the Dead Sea sect, people who ran away to contemplate and to live in an authoritarian society of their own. This is not new. It is the function of the bankruptcy of wealth. It is a function of the bankruptcy of a community that it ceases to provide a renewed eschatology. Our kids run away because they don't find enough in our homes. By the way, it's not only our kids who run away. Every kid runs away. Or I say kids of every community run away. We can afford it less. And maybe more of our kids run away proportionately because our kids are more intellectually sensitive and have been given a greater exposure in their childhood to ideas and to the need for religious fulfillment. And they haven't found it in our community.
Let me press you further on that question. Perhaps part of the problem is that there always has been a variegated diet in Judaism offered to its adherents, similarly in all religions. I mean, there's not simply Volozhin, there are also Hasidic courts. And there weren't just the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but there was always an Essene community. The Bible can be seen as a kind of anthology for many different temperaments and times. Now, the Midrash, which you talked about, is a particularly powerful one for people of a certain temperament, people of an intellectual temperament, a critical temperament, people who are both part of contemporary culture and have a respect for the past. There are always individuals, both Jews and others, who are subject to other kinds of temperaments. And unless those options are available within a reconstituted Judaism, unless there are different forms of eschatology, I don't think we really can simply talk about, the historical midrash, which is really close to your heart.
Oh, no. How do you know that that's the historical midrash that's close to my heart? Maybe it's the poetic midrash that's close to my heart. It's simply that I haven't yet been able to write the poem or find the poem that will respond or evoke what I need. I am not saying that I want only one kind of midrash. To the contrary, I want to generate or sustain or support a variety of midrashic responses. Let me tell you I mentioned Franz Rosenzweig and Mordecai Kaplan. Let me give you other midrashic responses that have not really made community. One is Martin Buber, who has written books about the Bible and very serious works of midrash about the Bible, about Moses, the kingdom of God, about the people of the period of the Judges. Yechezkel Kaufman has written a major midrash on all of Jewish history called Golav Nechar. He's written the great midrash called the history of the religion of Israel on the biblical world. Abram Joshua Heschel has written midrashim on the Sabbath, on Eastern Europe, on Revelation called Torah min hashamayim, in which he has shown that phrase has been understood differently by different people in every generation. So my answer is, there are people in our times who are writing different midrashim, and I welcome. I am not saying that I want to see midrash handed out to me in a TV prefabricated dinner or whatever you will call those things. I want to see us grappling with it, and I think we can. We can have a variety of them, even as we had in the past, provided we take them seriously.
Let me just ask one concluding question from the audience. It writes, "You are a voice in the wilderness. Are there any other voices raised in this bold fashion, calling for new tablets and willing to risk for their sake? Do you have brothers to whom you can refer us, either those that are writing at this point or speaking out throughout the American Jewish community?"
I am a voice speaking out in the wilderness.
Chancellor of the Seminary is now.
Sometimes, I'll tell you, it's mighty lonely. But I wouldn't say that I am a voice speaking out in the wilderness. I think there are many. I have heard many speak like this across the land. I have sat in a synagogue in the San Fernando Valley in California on a Friday night and watched Harold Schulweis preach a sermon and hold 900 people mesmerized for 40 minutes and then whip them up into a frenzy of the singing of psalms and dancing that made me think I was in Safed. That's on the other side of the world. I tell you, I go to shul after shul in Israel and experience that in Israel all the time. All the time. In conservative synagogues, in kibbutzim. I can tell you that I now am beginning to experience this in secular kibbutzim. They will not daven the way we do, or the way some of us do. They don't know how, and they find it alien to them for a lot of political reasons. But they are looking for ways. They want it. They are thirsty for it. And they're investing time, energy, and money in the recitation of such books. There are classes on the Siddur today in Shomer HaTzair Kibbutzim. That was an unspeakable sentence 20 years ago. It was a blasphemy. Today, it is a reality. So my answer is, we have not come to the end of the world, and I think that I am not a voice in the wilderness. There are many voices out there, if you are but willing to listen to them. I mentioned some of them. Heschel has been speaking through our times, and many of his disciples speak about that. Eliezer Berkovitz and others. I mean, I can go through the whole list. So my answer is, we have many comrades out there.
On behalf of the audience, I really want to take this opportunity to express our thanks to Dr. Cohen. He continues to be truly one of the most powerful, wide-ranging thinkers that I hear, and as one who hears a great deal of talk from these podiums here at the Y, I really want to thank him on behalf of all of us. Thank you for being with us. Join us in the reception. Good night.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.